Every single time anyone casts Speak with Animals or Speak with Plants, we get the hilarious DM goof that the target has an existential freakout at having been granted sentience, refusing to answer our questions or listen to any requests to calm them down. Instead, they just scream. We have to divert all our roleplay for a good 15 minutes, grinding the session's momentum to a screeching halt. Every single time. Multiple players have expressed that this joke has really diminishing returns, and at this point, it's just getting grating, as well as making any good aligned characters feel like terrible people whenever they cast this seemingly innocuous spell. I, as a ranger, am getting the worst of it, since, Speak with Animals and Speak with Plants are permanently on my spell list, and I'm supposed to be able to cast them for free once a day. First, we just half-joked about how this bit was getting predictable. Now we're just outright saying that's not entertaining anymore. It's just tedious. Despite our objections, the DM still thinks it's the funniest thing in the world and just keeps doing it. Ah, yes. The DM's gotcha. As if the DM doesn't have complete control over the entire world and has outwitted the players with their just sheer cleverness. This might be funny, once, but anything beyond that, and it's just getting extremely annoying, and also canceling out player abilities that are meant to help them with roleplay and interact with the world. Yeah, that's pretty lame too. I come to you with another horror story. This time, yours truly is the DM, and the problem player will be known as Coffee, since he was a coffee merchant. The rest of the cast are my brother Josh, another friend I'll just call Ranger, a female elven sorceress, and a female half-elf bard. A few years ago, I was recruiting for a Dark Sun campaign I was going to run online. I recruited sorceress, bard, my brother, Ranger, and Coffee. Now, I had DM'd for Coffee before. He played a character in my Underdark campaign, but he mainly played in his own solo story because he didn't like playing with other people? Yes, this was a red flag. And yes, I did catch it then. However, this wasn't a problem with the Underdark campaign since multiple players had their own solo stories. It was a role-playing heavy campaign with very little combat. That's why I found it a bit odd he wanted to join the Dark Sun campaign. See, the Dark Sun campaign was different. It was more of a straightforward campaign where the party was required to be together. I informed him of this when requested to join, and he said he was okay with it. I was reluctant, but I decided to just let him join. Then came session 1, and I realized I forgot one very important detail about Coffee. He is really attracted to elves. I mean really attracted to him. And sure enough, he was like a moth to a flame when Bard and Sorceress introduced themselves. Luckily, the two players were fully capable of handling him in-game, and there's no out-of-game pursuits of the individuals, though I did privately message them to make sure everything was alright. If I had a quarter for every elf-obsessed problem player we've had, I'd have 2 quarters. Blah 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 blah, weird to happen twice. Now, during the first session, Josh's character and Bard actually started to hit it off in-game. They played well off each other, unlike Coffee, who kept coming on strong to both of them in-game, so neither one would give them the time of day. Now, I didn't think anything of it at the time because everyone involved said everything was alright. None of this bleeding into out-of-character issues, but everyone seemed to be having a good time in-game. Then Session 2 happened. In Session 2, they entered their first dungeon, and that's when the issues started to become more apparent. Coffee specifically targeted Josh's character for anything under the sun. He didn't like Josh at all in-game. It started off as a snide comment and almost exploded into full-on PvP. The straw that broke the camel's back was when Josh entered a room with 3 treasure chests and started opening them. Coffee immediately runs up behind and puts a dagger to his character's throat. I immediately halted the session there and asked what the hell he was doing. I wasn't the only one angry as my brother was ready to go PvP with the guy. I reprimanded Coffee then and there. His only in-character excuse was that Josh might trigger a trap, but that wasn't even stated until the knives were coming out. I decided to end the session there, let people cool off, and we would get back together for Session 3 and finish the dungeon. In the days leading up to Session 3, a lot of conversations were being had between my players. Basically, Coffee was saying that people were playing their characters wrong, that they should be worshipping the ground he walked on because of backstory reasons, and on and on and on. That's right, Coffee had main character syndrome, and none of us were having it. He also really did not like my brother's character because he believed I showed him favoritism. His proof of this was that my brother had full plate mail, which was rare and extremely expensive in Dark Sun. However, he didn't have full plate mail. He had stone plate, which gave similar AC but reduced his speed by 15 feet. I showed him this, he started to back off a bit. I warned him that this was his second strike, and if he steps out of line again, he was out. It didn't take long. At the beginning of the third session, an argument quickly breaks out. I don't remember over what, but I quickly ejected Coffee from the game. After that, the session played out normally. My players completed the dungeon, and they got to tier. Ranger would go on to kill Coffee's character off screen and save me the trouble of writing him out. Overall, well handled on the part of the DM and the party. They see the problem player, they give him a few chances. When he fails those chances, he's out. No questions about it. Good stuff there. I'm starting to realize that main character syndrome may be the most common form of problem player, at least in TTRPGs, or at least from what I've seen. We see these sort of main character syndrome stories all the time. It's important to remember it's an ensemble game, not a single player game with one main character, but I say that all the time. The more interesting thing here is an antagonistic relationship between two players. Josh and Coffee are going at it, and this on the surface seems like just a bad thing. Hostile relationships between players, though, I don't think it's entirely bad. Not between players, but between characters. That kind of thing can work. We've seen it work. It's worked in my own campaign. I've seen it work on campaigns like Critical Role, where you have Caleb and Ford going at it, but in those games, and in my games as well, it's clear that it's not the players who are beefing. It is the characters. It is an in-character bout. And more importantly, it is resolved. It's conflict that has a purpose, that has a resolution. Here, Coffee is just being a dick. And that is never going to work out. I feel a bit dramatic posting this as a horror story when it's not really that bad, but I wasn't sure where else to talk about it. This is mostly just me telling a D&D story, but with a sour ending. It's a bit awkward in the Discord now. Big block of text for context below. I'll mark it where I cut to the point. So, I've been a player in a campaign set in Allegasia for like a year. I knew nothing about the setting before, but it's been good fun. The party has almost TPK'd several times, but two characters have always survived. Thorben, the homebrew, and Alden, the gulag. Others join and die, and somehow those two always make it out. One of the players got a new job, which meant he wouldn't be able to play anymore, so he worked with the DM to write him out of the story. The solution was to have his character, Asterion's magic, secretly be cursed, haunted by the spirit of an ancient vampire warlord named Acheron. In this last session, he was possessed by the spirit and started fighting us, and after an NPC wizard turned coat and joined him, they both got away. The campaign became about chasing him down. We discerned where he was heading and why, to the town of Tarnag to use a ritual amplifier to summon this Acheron. We beat him there, beat the dungeon guardian, and found the ritual site. Inside, we played with it a bit, figured out how it worked, and used it for our own goals. You could invest spell slots and HP into the circle. The amount of both determined the power of the ritual, but also made it harder to control. If you failed your save to contain the magic, terrible things would happen. But if you passed, you asked the circle for something and it would provide. One character asked for rejuvenation with a few slots and received the benefits of a long rest. I asked for answers after investing all of my warlock spell slots and received details on a few key questions from the campaign, but nobody else invested much to avoid backlash. So, all that preamble leads up to the boss fight. Asterion is coming into the dungeon, and we're waiting in one of the main chambers to put down his traitor wizard. Fight ensues. Things, they're bad. Alden goes down almost immediately after having 2 rounds worth of vampiric Minotaur Barbarian in the face. The Paladin and Sorcerer are missing all of their attacks, and Thorben is dealing with the wizard. Things are looking rough as Alden is dragged into the ritual room, the Paladin soon following to keep the fight going. The blood from the many rounds of combat is starting to pool on the floor and drain into the ritual, empowering it way more than what happened with our spell slots. It's clear this was Asterion's plan. He knew we would get there first, and if his wizard companion was too weak to fuel the ritual, he could use our blood instead. Thorben finished off the wizard and ran into the ritual room. A few more slogging rounds of combat, Asterion was barely injured due to his regeneration. Alden was on death's door, and the party, we were kind of hopeless. The DM suggested running. But Thorben did not want to run. He thought that either they stopped Acheron's escape or they died trying. And he also didn't want to leave Alden to die. If one dies, both die. So he sprinted past Asterion to the ritual pedestal and said he'd bleed all of his hit points into the circle to empower it further and wished to destroy Acheron. Context ends here. The DM asked if he was sure. He said yeah. He then asked for a wisdom save to contain the amount of magic he was channeling. He got a 25. The DM starts thinking, and then seemed kinda stumped. He suggested we end the session there. He'd figure it out between sessions and then start the session with the aftermath. Everyone agreed. A few people went to bed, but I stayed in the Discord with him, and he started getting angry, ranting about how, he never just flees, he always has to fight to the death, or it was stupid, he should have run away. A lot of salt directed at Thorben's player for apparently making the wrong move in trying to kill the boss. He didn't like how he now had to choose whether the party dies because Thorben can't control that much magic, or the BBEG he has planned is rendered moot by a wish. I didn't want to argue about it, but I thought it was a cool moment, and couldn't see why he was so frustrated by it. He started saying that it would be the end of the whole campaign either way. If we TPK, we won't want to restart. If we kill Acheron, there won't be a finale. And while we talked about it, he became more and more frustrated, resenting the player for ruining the campaign. Someone else joined the Discord, and while the DM thought he was subtle, the two of them talked about the boss being wounded and getting away, and then the DM suddenly stopped complaining and seemed excited to do the next session. Next session is supposed to be tomorrow. Not sure how it'll go, but I'm hoping it doesn't involve the DM throwing away a character sacrifice at the end of a huge boss fight just to knock the BBEG down a peg. Like I said, not the most dramatic story, no pedo DMs or essay bards, just a bit of DM rage. The DM in question sees this post, no hard feelings. It was just a weirdly hostile reaction to a moment I found pretty enjoyable. Don't worry, I'm not going to leave you on a cliffhanger. Eyes up, we've got part 2. So, we ran the follow-up session today, which wasn't much of a session. The events of the session were as follows. Thorben failed to contain the spell, the magic went chaotic, and everyone except Thorben and Asterion were teleported out of the temple to the surface. Then the magic coalesced into a miniature sun, which shoots rays into both of them. They both began spewing fire out of their bodies from the eyes, nose, mouth, and they were incinerated from the inside out. Our paladin tore the temple door open, and we made our way back down to the ritual site to find both of their incinerated bodies. Alden took Thorben's remains and brought him back up to the surface. He cast Speak with Dead and preemptively asked 3 questions. Before you started adventuring, how did you think you were going to die? Do you have any regrets? How did you want to be buried? But the DM said the spell failed. The magic that had annihilated both of them did so thoroughly. There was no Thorben to ask at all. The DM asked to end it there. So we did. Campaign over. He mentioned maybe rebooting the setting to finish the rest of his prep, but also said he kinda wanted to switch systems, and said that I could start DMing again in the meantime. So, horror story resolved? No hard feelings, a pretty nice ending, just unfortunate that it had to be cut in half. I think the DM's way of handling this is, well, it was okay. First and foremost, the really good thing the DM did was end the session when he felt uncertain about where to continue the game. If you have no idea what's going to happen because of something incredibly unexpected that completely changes the trajectory of the campaign, ending the session there so you have time to mull it over, that is really important. However, I do think the DM's way of handling it was okay, but it wasn't great. I do think it was good that he allowed the sacrifice to go through, Thorben died, as Thorben expected, and the BBEG was stopped. Of course, I do think the Speak with Dead failing thing, that was just petty. I don't see why that had to happen. This could have been a really sweet, really great moment, a great epilogue, a send-off for the character, but the DM just kind of said, no, not gonna lie, kinda lame. I understand that your BBEG getting wiped out before they get a chance in the spotlight, that really sucks, and that's why I don't let things like Wish in my game, but a moment like this, I would totally let this go. This is epic. This is going to be remembered by the players forever, and it's on the DM to let it flow into the story. Okay, the BBEG is dead now. What if his ravenous armies are now pouring into the mortal realm? There must always be a Lich King style. That could work. That would be a great way to both honor the sacrifice and continue the game. Now the party must rally their allies, honor their fallen friends' memory, and take the fight to the remnants of Acheron's forces. That could have been cool, but, you know, I guess this works too. At least there's no bad feelings. That's good to see. One day, I'm sitting at home and scrolling through Facebook when I see an ad for a D&D group page to audition to be a cast member or dungeon master for a new and upcoming D&D stream. The advertisement looks good and has a Discord posted. I figured, why not? I open the link and lo and behold, the project creator is in voice chat. I jump in and say hello. I tell him some of my experience as a dungeon master and I set up an audition. Within a few days, I audition, and a few days later, to my surprise, I am his top pick for DM. I am honored, but now I have to put some serious thought into becoming his DM, as this is a big commitment. After a week or so, I let him know that I am currently too busy to be his DM and offer myself up as his backup should he not be able to find a suitable replacement in a few months. He asks me to be a character instead, as it's significantly less responsibility. I tell him I need to think about it, but he falls so much in love with my character idea and my voice acting that he begins ordering commission art for my character. He announces me as his first audition pick and puts my character in all of his banner art and uses my voice clips to convince people that this is a legit project. Over the next few weeks/months, I am participating in his auditions and offering ideas on his project, and the whole thing begins to tear at the seams. He begins to show his true nature as a rude and emotionally abusive person. Turns out this guy has a history of unsuccessful streams that he's tried to start that have all fallen apart due to him throwing temper tantrums on stream and all of his friends abandoning him. As he begins to gather a group of people who want to support his vision and passion, we begin to run into many people who run away from the project the moment they hear the name of the person running it. He begins to hit on the female cast members, and they start to become uncomfortable having one-on-one voice calls with him, and require that at least one other person be present. He finds a very talented person to become the DM, and asks to start a relationship with her, to which she, declines. He checks out the social media posts of cast members or others who would want to be involved with the project and demands certain posts be removed and cautions everyone to watch what they post. He then begins to post his own controversial political opinions and starts tearing apart the cast, demanding that we agree with him politically. He begins to lecture others on their acting style and playstyle when it becomes clear he is the weakest link of the current cast. When someone fails an audition, he will keep them around for an hour or so and lecture them on everything they did wrong and tell them they are not going further in the audition process, but they should stick around to learn from him so they can essentially be rehabilitated/coached to become good players or good DMs. Months later, his project is still not off the ground, and it probably never will be. And I am so happy I took a step back from the idea of being a professional streamer and just played D&D for fun. If you are asked to participate in a stream or to audition for a project, make sure that you spend time getting to know who is running it. You might end up wasting a lot of your free time. I think the whole topic of D&D streaming and how it's done is a topic for another day. I've learned so much about it just from running my own D&D show on YouTube. There were a lot of lessons that I did not expect. It's very different from any other piece of content I have ever posted. But anyway, that's a talk for another day. This guy is toxic as hell. I think that's pretty obvious just by reading the story. Flirting with your D&D party mates, or hell, unsolicited flirting in general is kind of creepy from my view, and yeah, it's definitely creepy here. On top of that, the abuse of the people who don't make it into the audition process is just not needed, guys. Write them feedback and move on. You don't need to harp on them and tell them how terrible they are for hours and then tell them that you're gonna rehabilitate them. That's just needlessly annoying. In D&D, you need a positive dynamic at the table that is so incredibly important to telling a compelling story together. If people dislike each other at the table, game's not going to work out. That is 100-fold when it comes to running a streamed show as well. And that's something that that guy clearly does not understand. So this is a horror story I happen to be a part of, even though I wasn't playing in the game, or playing TTRPGs at all. The game in question was Dungeons & Dragons, because of course it was, but it was a large group with like 9 or 10 players. They were all middle-aged, and looked to be about in their 30s up to mid-50s, so not a bunch of kids. I don't know much about the group. I also don't know for sure if the player in question is a that guy, since I never paid much attention to the game, but he did act like one. So anyway, I would frequent my local game store for board game night, which was the one night a week that was designated for adult board gaming. I believe there was a separate afternoon that was for homeschooled children. A lot of board gamers would show up weekly for this night, and the play area was small. Also, there were frequently Magic the Gathering tournaments and events scheduled on board game night, and they got dibs on the space since MTG accounted for a majority of the store's profits. If Magic was happening, we were often crammed into a smaller space. The tables in the place were also a bit too small for board gaming. A normal-sized board game didn't really fit on the table, and we just had to make do. That was, except for one table, which was very long and very wide. You could make a reservation for the big table. We usually didn't and preferred to leave it open, so anyone who needed to use it for a game could use it. If we had a large group of players who wanted to play something special that absolutely needed a bigger table, occasionally it would be planned ahead and the table would get reserved for the night. And usually games that size would take up the entire night to play anyway. That is until a large D&D group decide they want to play at the game shop on board game night and talk to the staff to reserve the nice table in perpetuity forever for their campaign. From then on, every board game night, they had that table reserved. Technically, they were following the rules, but come on, that was an asshole move. I don't think I should have to explain why. And they were very territorial about their reservation. Sometimes they'd show up as a group hours late to the reservation and make staff kick people off the table who had been playing on it because they reserved it. Sometimes they decided to play light board games instead of D&D, but they still got that table, even though the games they played on were on the smaller side and could easily fit somewhere else. Also, that table was big enough to easily accommodate 3 normal-sized board games, and they had a 1-game/1-table rule. When they would decide to play board games, they would split into 2 or 3 groups. One would take the big table, and the others would take a small table each. And like I said, we were often cramped for space because of MTG events. They were also, for some reason, excluded from the rule where if you wanted to play in the store, you had to be inclusive and openly welcome anyone else at the store that wanted to play. I know that kind of inclusivity may not work for an RPG campaign, but they were also insular and refused to play with anyone else when they played board games. It wasn't a problem with our group either. There were several MTG players that would show up every week hoping for an event, and if there wasn't one, they would just play board games with the board gaming people. The owner and staff would often bring people over and introduce them to us because they want to try these board games, and we would adjust our games to fit them in. I have, and sometimes still do, play TTRPGs, which is why I'm in this group. And I've even played D&D before, but don't anymore. Quite a few people in the board gaming group were also into D&D, and several had ongoing weekly games. So this isn't just hating on people who play a different thing. Those people were just being assholes. For the most part, though, outside of their table tantrums, we didn't interact much. They were a pretty insular group. One night, a particularly quiet night with no magic, we were all happily playing our tabletop games, whatever they were, when suddenly one of the D&D players falls out of his chair and starts having a seizure. His friends at the table just sat there, staring as the rest of us jumped up and started moving furniture around. It was a cramped space to give him room so he didn't hurt himself. He seized for several minutes, so it was definitely serious. Then he came out of it. He saw us all standing there around him, except his friends, who hadn't even bothered to get out of their seats. And we helped him up, and he said, "Oh, sorry, must have fallen down my chair." We told him he didn't fall out of his chair. He had a seizure. He insisted he didn't. We asked him if he had epilepsy. He said no. We told him he needed to see a doctor. We had a nurse with us who was trying to talk to him and convince him to see a doctor. He insisted he only fell out of his chair and didn't have a seizure. Everyone in the store had just watched him convulse on the ground for minutes. He argued with us all for 15 minutes that he had just fallen out of his chair. Maybe he was a bit out of it. That's understandable considering the situation. Not sure what his exact relationship with his D&D group was, but they had been playing together every week for over a year now. Not one of them spoke up to say that he didn't fall out of the chair and maybe he should see a doctor. They just sat there silently, like it wasn't for certain he was seizing, and maybe he did just fall out of his chair. After 15 minutes, we gave up and got to work putting the tables back as him and his friends continued on with their weekly game like nothing happened. Maybe getting their weekly D&D fix was more important than making sure one of the players was alright. Seems like they were okay treating each other the same way they treated everyone else. Maybe it was an entire table of that guys, and this is the game they all end up together once they've been kicked out of every other game. I'm just gonna say, right at the top here, if you are having a medical emergency, do not continue playing Dungeons & Dragons. I'm ashamed to say that I speak with somewhat experience here. I wasn't playing D&D, but I was playing Destiny's The Vault of Glass. And look, I was sick. I was not doing okay, and I was throwing up. And I should have stopped playing, but I didn't. That was stupid. Don't be like me. I was stupid. Got that? Great. Let's talk about game stores now. Game stores, look, they only have so much space. And when you're playing in a community like that, it's important that you treat it like a community. You're working together. Maybe not to play D&D, everyone plays their own things, but you're all working together to have fun. These players are not doing that. These players are being hostile. They're even being territorial in a way, which is just, yeah, not great at all in any way here. I will say, it's also the staff's job to enforce their policies, and I guess the D&D players are technically following the rules, but it's clear they're negatively affecting the experience at the store, and that is the staff's prerogative, though at the same time, this wouldn't be a problem if the group weren't being dicks in the first place. What is truly concerning to me is that the group isn't helping the player who is literally having a seizure. That is really concerning. Just moving the furniture out of the way, just getting up from your seat and helping the rest of the store who are trying to help, that is the least you could do. They couldn't even do that. I mean, that is the most concerning part to me. Though the whole thing is just, yeah, not great in general. Alright, and that concludes today's episode of RPG Horror Stories. If you guys enjoyed it, if you want to see more of my content, then you can check out Tabletop Tavern Tips, where I give advice for both DMs and players, old and new. And while you're there in the cards, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment. Don't just stand there to let me know you made it to the end of the video. Unless it's like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.